morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground as Samuel Hayes stood on his front porch, surveying the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. The coffee in his weathered hands had grown cold, but he barely noticed lost in thought about the struggles that had mounted like storm clouds on the horizon. At 62, Samuel had weathered many storms, both literal and otherwise. His ranch had survived droughts, floods, and market crashes. But lately, the weight of keeping it all together pressed heavier on his shoulders each day. The cattle prices had dropped again, and the banknotes seemed to multiply like tumbleweeds in the wind. His wife Martha had passed 2 springs ago, leaving him with memories that both comforted and ached in equal measure. Their children had moved to the cities chasing dreams that concrete and steel promised, but Samuel remained rooted to this land, like the old oak tree by the creek. Its branches had sheltered 4 generations of his family, and he intended for it to shelter more. The sound of approaching hooves pulled him from his reverie. 2 figures on horseback were making their way up the long drive, their silhouettes wavering in the morning heat. As they drew closer, Samuel could see they were young women, maybe in their 20s. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and something about their posture spoke of exhaustion that went bone deep. Samuel set down his coffee cup and walked slowly toward them. His knees protested the movement, a reminder of decades spent working this unforgiving land. The women had stopped their horses near the barn and were looking around with eyes that held both hope and fear. The taller of the 2 women had dark hair that hung in tangles around her face. She wore what might have once been a blue dress but was now faded to the color of old denim. Her companion was smaller, with lighter hair and green eyes that reminded Samuel of spring grass after rain. Both women bore the unmistakable signs of hardship. "Morning, ladies." Samuel called out, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to dealing with skittish animals and uncertain situations. "Looks like you've had a rough go of it." The dark-haired woman straightened in her saddle. "We don't want any trouble, mister. We were just hoping maybe you might have some work, need hands to help with anything at all." Samuel studied their faces, seeing something there that tugged at memories of his own children when they were small, and the world seemed too big and uncertain. Name's Samuel Hayes. "This is my spread. Been in the family since before the war." He paused, letting the silence settle between them like dust after a passing rider. Elizabeth, the dark-haired woman, said after a moment, "This is my sister Mary. We can work hard, sir. We ain't afraid of honest labor." Mary spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "We just need a chance, Mr. Hayes, a place to rest and earn our keep." Something in her tone reminded Samuel of an injured bird Martha had once found broken wing, and all she had nursed it back to health. In a box by the kitchen window, feeding it drops of water and crumbs of bread until it could fly again. These 2 young women had that same fragile quality. "Well now," Samuel said, scratching his grizzled chin, "I reckon I could use some help around here. Place has gotten a bit much for one old man to handle proper." The truth was, he had been managing just fine, but something told him these women needed more than work. They needed sanctuary. He gestured toward the house. "Why don't you ladies climb down and we'll get you something to eat? Talk about what needs doing around here." Elizabeth and Mary exchanged glances that spoke of conversations held without words, the kind of communication that comes from shared hardship and mutual dependence. After a moment, they dismounted, their movements careful and deliberate. As they walked toward the house, Samuel noticed how they stayed close together like 2 saplings that had grown twisted around each other for support. Their story was written in the way they moved, in the careful way they watched the horizon, as if expecting trouble to appear at any moment. The kitchen still held the warmth of Martha's presence even 2 years after her passing. Samuel had kept it much the same way she had left it, clean and functional, but with small touches that spoke of a woman's hand. The checked curtains she had sewn still hung at the windows, and her favorite coffee pot still sat on the stove. "Sit yourselves down," Samuel said, indicating the worn wooden table that had served countless meals to family and friends over the years. "I'll rustle up some breakfast." As he moved around the kitchen, gathering eggs and bacon, Samuel found himself remembering Martha and how she had always insisted on feeding anyone who came to their door. It didn't matter if they were neighbors or strangers passing through. Her philosophy had been simple: hungry. People needed food, and it was not their place to judge why someone was hungry. Elizabeth and Mary sat stiffly at first, their eyes darting around the room as if cataloging possible exits or threats. But gradually, as the smell of cooking food filled the air and Samuel kept up a gentle stream of conversation about the weather and the ranch, they began to relax. "This is mighty kind of you, Mr. Hayes," Elizabeth said when Samuel placed heaping plates before them. "We ain't used to such generosity." Samuel poured coffee for all three of them, the rich aroma mixing with the morning air that drifted through the open windows. "My Martha always said kindness was like water in the desert. You never know when someone might be dying of thirst." The women ate, with the careful efficiency of people who had not known when their next meal might come. Samuel found himself thinking about his own children, and wondering if somewhere someone had shown them similar kindness when they needed it. The thought made him feel connected to something larger than his own troubles. After breakfast, Samuel showed them around the property, pointing out the various chores that needed attention. The chicken coop needed mucking, the vegetable garden was overrun with weeds, and the barn could use a good cleaning. It was honest work, the kind that left you tired in your bones but satisfied in your spirit. "We can start right away," Mary said, and for the first time since their arrival she smiled. It transformed her face, completely chasing away the shadows that had lingered around her eyes. "No rush," Samuel replied. "Why don't you ladies get yourselves settled first? There's a small cabin out back where my hired hands used to stay. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and dry." The cabin had sat empty for 2 years since his last ranch hand had moved on to seek opportunities in the railroad towns. Samuel had kept it maintained more from habit than necessity, but now he was glad for his diligence. It would provide Elizabeth and Mary with privacy and independence while keeping them close enough for safety. As the days passed, Samuel found himself looking forward to the sounds of activity around the ranch. The laughter that occasionally drifted from the cabin reminded him of when his own children were young and the house had been full of voices and footsteps. Elizabeth and Mary worked with quiet determination, tackling each task with thoroughness that spoke of deep gratitude. In the evening, Samuel often found himself sitting on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sometimes the women would join him and they would sit in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the prairie settling into night. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Elizabeth finally shared their story. Her voice was soft but steady, as she spoke of a home that had been lost to circumstances beyond their control, of family members who had turned away when times got hard, and of the long journey that had brought them to his door. "We heard about your place from folks in town," she said. "They said you were fair and decent, that you judged people by their character, not their circumstances." Samuel felt a flush of pride knowing that his reputation in the community reflected the values Martha had helped him cultivate over the years. "My wife always said that character was like gold. It only showed its true value when it was tested by fire." Mary leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Hayes, can I ask you something?" When he nodded, she continued, "Why did you take us in? You didn't know us from Adam. We could have been anyone." Samuel considered the question while watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I suppose I recognized something in you both. Something I hope someone would recognize in my own children if they ever found themselves in need." He paused. "Besides, my Martha wouldn't have forgiven me if I had turned away 2 young women who needed help." As weeks turned into months, Samuel found his ranch running more smoothly than it had in years. Elizabeth had a natural way with the horses, and Mary proved to have an intuitive understanding of the garden that reminded him of his late wife. The vegetables grew, larger and more abundant under her care, as if responding to the gentleness in her touch. The financial pressures that had weighed so heavily on Samuel began to ease, not because his circumstances had dramatically improved, but because the burden was now shared. The simple act of having other people around, people who cared about the success of the ranch, had lifted his spirits in ways he had not anticipated. One evening, as autumn painted the leaves in brilliant reds and golds, Elizabeth approached Samuel with unusual formality. "Mr. Hayes, Mary and I have been talking. We know you've been struggling to keep this place going, and we want to help, not just with the work, but with the financial side too." Samuel raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "I appreciate the thought, Elizabeth, but I couldn't ask you to." "You're not asking," Mary interrupted, joining them on the porch. We have some savings money, mem.